brings 15 of it. And we think we'll do that for the ice cream social this year in June. So what does everybody think about that? Do they have anything in mind that they would make to bring to that event? It doesn't. It can be anything at all. In fact, mine was limoncello. It was alcohol. I traded limoncello and, and limoncello candy. And Holly, you brought something that was crocheted. She brought little crocheted coasters. David brought cookies. Who else was there? She brought candles. Oh, those were great. Who else brought something? Anybody else come to that? So yeah, so I think that'd be really fun. And the other thing we're trying to make right now is Austin Organic Gardener t-shirts. So we're going to hand make them, and it's a multi-step process. So we're going to do some of the process at the event so we can, maybe put the stamp on or whatever. So I haven't figured that out yet. I have all the t-shirts. Yeah. That I've gotten from thrift stores. So I think it's important to reuse stuff and not buy new, which is why we're making them. So any questions about that? No. So thank you so much, guys, for cooking. That was really fun. Did everybody like that? Yeah. All right. So let's get on to our speaker if we have no questions. Craig's up there somewhere in the internet. Craig is, I'm going to try your last name, LeHoullier.
Oui, pretty good.
I have been to France. Author and tomato enthusiast will discuss all things tomato, from sowing seeds to saving seeds and everything in between. He is the known NC Tomato Man, North Carolina, I'm assuming. Some know him as the fellow who named Cherokee purple in 1990. To others, he is the author of Epic Tomato and or Growing Vegetables and Straw Bales, and he is the co-host of Tomato Palooza, a co-leader of the Dwarf Tomato Breeding Project, or just an odd person with a garden where the driveway used to be. And it's Craig.
Thank you so much. And in my spare time, actually, I do keep myself busy. Thank you, Mary. I want to thank Marie for the invitation, for David for helping out to get this all working. And we're going to have a lot of fun here. I'm in Hendersonville, North Carolina, which is, I don't know if anybody's been to the western part of North Carolina where the Blue Ridge Mountains are, about 20 miles south of Asheville. And I have never been to Austin, but I would love to go there. My wife and I are longtime watchers of Austin city limits. The only place we spent any time in Texas is Abilene, where my daughter lived there for a few years and grew incredibly good tomatoes in containers. So anyway, it's great to be here. I call these my pajama talks because I can be nice and comfy. Usually I'm sitting in my office, but my grandson's bedroom is there. We'll talk about that in a moment. So I always like to share a few pictures about what I'm up to now. Had my knee replaced on February 4th. It's working great. I'm back to hiking and gardening. It really was no problem whatsoever. So I highly recommend it. Get rid of your sore knees and go for it. So this little guy is Eli, and he really is our delight. Our daughter Caitlin and Eli have been living with us here, my wife and I, since August, and Caitlin works full time. So Sue and I are really busy watching the little guy from 7 in the morning till 5 in the evening until Caitlin gets home 5 days a week. And then we punch the clock and say, okay, Caitlin, he's all yours. But this is Sue blowing bubbles, and I fully expect that he's going to be helping in the garden next year instead of going over and try to dig the dirt out of my straw bales, which often contain seeds. So this is what my garden looks like as of today.
Can't see it.
We planted everything between April 27th, which is when we direct seeded beans, squash, cucumbers, and corn in straw bales. And then the seedlings went in. Some of them went in on April 30th, and then the rest in the grow bags went in May 8th. Now, and that's marlin patrolling for moles and other critters. This is typically what my backyard garden looks like when it's at its peak. And this was from last year. This is a combination of mostly straw bales with quite a few grow bags, and it just works out wonderfully. This backyard is our septic field, so if we couldn't grow on top of it, we couldn't have a garden. And please, if I talk too fast or if the sound is not quite right, um, let me know and I'll slow down or speak up or whatever you need me to do. So we're going to talk a lot about tomatoes tonight, and we'll talk about a few methods, container gardening and straw bale gardening. But mostly I want to position where we are in 2026 are the luckiest tomato growers in US history. Now, when we moved from Pennsylvania to North Carolina, we moved to Raleigh in 1992. I thought, sure, I'd be able to go to farmers markets and see incredible diversity. But no, it was the round red weapons that was mostly portrayed in farmers markets. But let's go back way before 1992. Let's go to 1840. And this is a page from a Breck seed catalog. Breck was one of the first seedsmen, and they set up in New England. And let's say you wanted to grow tomatoes. Well, you're out of luck. You could grow tomato. No description, no other varieties. Below tomato were 20 turnips, above tomato were 30 squash, just tomato. So the reason that tomatoes were not well represented in American seed catalogs in the mid 1800s is because foolish us, we thought they were poisonous. Never mind that they were consumed by indigenous people in Central and South America for time immemorial, or when they made their way to Spain in the 1580s, Europeans were gouging themselves on them. We brave Americans thought they were poisonous. That improved by about the 1850s and 1860s, and then we got on the train and American seed companies started developing our own tomatoes. What would tomato have looked like? And the way we can guess is to look at um, still life paintings of food from Europe somewhere prior to 1840, because almost all of our vegetable varieties came from Europe at the time. And lo and behold, I found this painting by Melendez at Spanish, 1770s, and look at that. They look just like Castelluto Genovese or Rosso Sicilian or the so-called ugly heirloom. So we've kind of come full circle. We started with ugly creased tomatoes that weren't great for canning. We smoothed them, we took the flavor out of them, and now we've gone all the way back to the ugly tomato. This is a quick story that I want to say that's kind of interesting. So I've been really lucky to speak several times at Monticello, and that's it's just one of those shrines to gardening because of all of the work Thomas Jefferson did there in the garden. He did a lot of other things too, but he was a very good gardener. Um, and the staff at Monticello, as they would excavate different sections of the area, would take layers of soil that they could date, and they would always take a sample of the soil and bring it to the greenhouse just by chance that something would grow. Well, when I attended, and I believe it was 2014, they asked me to come a day early so I could come to the garden and see something amazing. One of those layers of dirt that was from the 1780 to 1800 range grew a tomato plant. And I call it Monticello mystery tomato. They can't believe that a tomato seed would have survived for that long. My view is that nothing is impossible in gardening, depending on particular conditions, whether they be anaerobic or a particular cold way into the ground. But I now have seeds of this. Monticello was going to do DNA testing and explore it, but they've decided no, it couldn't be old. So now I get to grow it, and it looks just like the painting of the tomato from Spain. So this is my own little secret that I play with. So I've come a long way since 1840, and I went back to that same farmer's market before we moved to Hendersonville in 2019. and saw whites and yellows, oranges, stripes, greens, pinks, purples, chocolates, you name it. So we are indeed the most fortunate tomato growers ever. In fact, if you join the Seed Savers Exchange, you could choose from over 10,000 different named varieties. So the first half of this talk is a little bit of a travelogue. Let's talk about some basics with tomatoes and get into the question, how do you choose what you want to grow based on parameters? But the importance of the Seed Savers Exchange cannot be overstated. When they formed in 1975, 51 years ago now, hybrids were overtaking anything that was not a hybrid, and the numbers of our distinct different varieties of everything, different flowers, different vegetables, different apples, was they were disappearing. We were losing our genetic heritage. So Kent Wheatley and Diane Wheatley formed the Seed Savers Exchange to create a mechanism whereby farmers from all over the world could share seeds of things that they've had in their family for generations. That's the very thick yearbook. That's like a telephone book that has all of the wonderful diversity in it. But right now, you probably get your seeds from seed catalogs like these or garden centers. How do you choose what to grow? Because the diversity is staggering. Well, first you have to think about what kind of garden you wish to have, what kind of productivity you wish to have, what problems you've had in the past and hope to avoid in the future. Hybrids, of course, we've all heard of hybrid tomatoes. Sun Gold, even though it's the only hybrid I grow, it also happens to perhaps be my favorite tomato. Hybrids are created from crossing two varieties that are secrets that the company knows about. They take pollen from the male, apply it to the flowers of the female, a little tomato forms, it ripens, and the seeds in that tomato end up in the packet. That's the F1 hybrid. And often what you get is better than the sum of the parts, but we don't know what those parts are. Grow hybrids if there's a hybrid variety you particularly love, Better Boy, Big Boy, Celebrity, Sun Gold, etc. But don't grow hybrids if you want to focus on seed saving and sharing, because a hybrid, when you save seeds and grow it out, will segregate into all kinds of different recombinations of the genes. Of course, none of which will have names. I always am concerned with seed libraries. If people return seeds, say from hybrids, the gardeners will get vegetables, but there will be no way to identify what they are. A hybrid can never be an heirloom because an heirloom has been around long enough so that it's genetically stable. Heirlooms often have stories associated with them, and I'm going to tell one in a moment. I like to use a guide rule that tomatoes before 1950, even if they were developed by seed companies, if they're still in existence, are heirlooms. Marglobe is an heirloom. Rutgers. The reason I use 1950 is that's the year Burpee created Big Boy, and all seed companies noticed how profitable that was because if people wanted seed, they had to come back to Burpee. And that's what caused the erosion of our genetic diversity. Now, there still are non-hybrids being created and sold. Um, Cherokee chocolate and Cherokee green are varieties that I found of mutations of Cherokee purple. They're from the 1980s. All of our dwarf tomato project varieties, we don't put them on the market until they're stable. So those are open pollinated. So the difference between open pollinated as heirloom tends to be how long it's been around. So if you want to be a seed grower and sharer and you love massive diversity, you want to grow tomatoes as small as peas or as large as melons, every color you can imagine, you will find more choices if you stick to open pollinated and heirloom types. Now, of course, hybrids do have some disease tolerances and resistances bred in, but that doesn't make the plants won't get the disease. It just gives them a few more weeks, maybe a month of staying time. But even hybrids in an area of high disease pressure will go down. So that's your first decision. Do you want to grow hybrids? Do you want to grow open pollinators? The second is knowing what your garden area is like and what your physical capabilities are like. Do you want to grow indeterminates? Now, 95% of tomato varieties are indeterminate, and they're the ones that grow up and they grow out and they sucker everywhere. They put out enormous yields, but you have to think of a way to keep them under control. That's me back in probably 1996 in Raleigh. So I have a lot more hair there. That's me standing next to a Cherokee Purple in June. I'm 6 feet tall. That Cherokee Purple is already 8 feet tall. Where's it going to go next? Determinants are tomatoes that they stop growing vertically at about 3 feet. They're about 3 feet wide. They put out a load of blossoms. They ripen their fruit all within a few weeks, and they're done. So they're a good type to grow if you want to grow a tomato in a container, if you want to grow a tomato supported by a cage, and you want to can or make sauce. And it's important to have 20 or 25 pounds of those aromas coming out really close together so you can get your processing done. Determinants never seem to get the flavor intensity of indeterminates because they don't have enough leaf area for numbers of fruit. They just don't have the machinery to produce the sugars and the flavors. Dwarfs take the growth restricting characteristics of determinate and combine it with the gradual fruiting throughout the season of the indeterminate. They're almost the perfect tomato for having a productive variety that stays at half the height of the indeterminate. So the often useless 4-foot tomato cage is wonderful for dwarfs or determinants. Whereas for indeterminates, you need to think about how to control them, how to sucker them. We'll talk about suckering in a moment. So there's 2 decision points. Can you handle tall vines? Do you want shorter vines? And this will help you to guide you through what you want to grow. Now, heirlooms have wonderful stories, and Mary at the introduction talked about me naming Cherokee Purple. So this tomato came to me when a fellow named John Green in Tennessee, who turns out received seeds of this unnamed tomato from Jean Greenlee, who lived nearby in Rutledge, Tennessee. Jean received them from her grandfather, who got them from the Cherokee Nation in the 1880s. JD decided to share them with me in 1990 because he knew I was someone that loved tomatoes and cared for them, would grow them, and think of a good thing to do with them. So this was the first tomato of this particular color. It's the pink black or kind of the dusky purplish. It's not an antho tomato. It's not the one with the black shoulders. It's just got that dark color. Anybody who's grown black crim, that's another tomato of that color. So I grew this tomato and loved it and thought, well, I'm a typical gardener. If I grow something that's great, I'm going to share it with as many people that I know. So I sent it to my friend Jeff McCormick, who owns Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. He grew it. He loved the story. I named it Cherokee Purple. And he called me back and said, I love the flavor. I love the story, but it looks like a bruised leg. The public will never accept a tomato of that color. But I'll tell you what, Craig, I'm going to put it in my seed catalog in 1993 with a warning, only for the adventurous. And don't you know it, here we are in 2026, and I can go pretty much to any farmer's market in the country and see that being grown and sold and purchased. So I don't think I chose the tomato to be interested in. I think the tomato has decided I'm the one who's supposed to do these things. I love to create new hybrids. And in fact, this is open pollinated. I call this one of the many tomorrow's heirlooms that I helped create. This is Lucky Bling, and it's red with yellow streaks. It has some green on the shoulder and in the gel, and it's a potato leaf plant with white and green variegation. And I bred all of those genes in just to look like that. And if all goes well, Victory Seed Company, which actually is very nearby you now in Texas, they moved there from when Mike Dunton of Oregon sold the company to Dave Whitinger. Dave is the Dave of Dave's Garden. He now is in Texas, owning Victory Seed Company, and anytime I develop a tomato, he puts it in his seed catalog. So we can watch for this in the fall, probably. Now, the dwarf tomato breeding project, I officially ended it in 2023 on the scale I was managing it, but it's still ticking along with just me and a few people that are interested in trying things. We've had 1,000 volunteers plus over 50 states and 25 countries, and we've put 175 varieties in seed catalogs, primarily Victory seeds. And once Victory sells it, other seed companies get it from them and start carrying in theirs. So every tomato on this cutting board came from a plant that's half the height of an indeterminate and yields gradually, very nicely, until frost kills it or disease, and it will grow fine in a 5-gallon container. These are what dwarf tomatoes look like. They're absolutely beautiful plant. The one in the front and center is a potato leaf dwarf. Before we started the project, there was only one, and it was awful. Now there's dozens and dozens. The one to the left of it is a regular leaf dwarf. The gene that creates the dwarf growth habit also gives the plants a very lush, dark bluish green foliage that's almost crinkly. And they have that unique growth habit. These are in 5-gallon pots. They're just about ready to start maturing fruit. They're about 3 feet tall. Now, I just wanted to show a few, just to show just a little bit of the diversity of color and size and shape. Dwarf Sweet Sue in the upper left, I named for my wife Sue, and it's my favorite dwarf. And she does not, I don't get in trouble if I don't say that. It's an absolutely wonderful tomato. Tending to the sweet side, um, and we're going to talk about flavor characteristics of tomatoes in general in a moment. And the upper right is dwarf speckled heart, which I used speckled Roman, which is an indeterminate striped paste tomato, as our crossing partner to come up with that. Fred tie-dye, which looks like Cherokee purple with tie-dye green lines. That's in the lower left. And Uluru ochre, which is a color that our project discovered. The dusky orange, whereas Cherokee purple is a dusky tomato. This is dusky also, but it's got orange. And these tomatoes you see run from 4 to 6 ounces for Sweet Sue to 6 to 8 for Speckled Heart, 6 to 8 for Fred's tie-dye, and about 6 to 16 for Uluru Ochre. So looking at 1-pound tomatoes on 3-foot tall plants is quite a sight. And here's the primary public access. The Victory Seed Company has their own dwarf page, which you can look at and look at the descriptions and search for all 175 varieties. I've rated many of them, and even though they're all my children, I'm an honest rater. So there's a few 3 stars. People love them in other areas of the country. What we don't know yet about the dwarfs, because we only released the first few in 2010, which ones will do great in which areas of the country, which ones will suffer, which ones are really popular, which ones do people find kind of boring, which ones are very disease susceptible, which ones resist disease well. That information is all going to be coming in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years as more and more people grow them. Now let's talk a little bit about color and flavor, because in my 40 years of gardening, I've grown and tasted about 4,000 different tomatoes of every shape, size, color. I have found no correlation, but it is fun to explore. And here are the 3 Cherokees. You've got Cherokee purple on the left and the slices to the right of it. Tomatoes look very similar once you cut them. It's all about the skin color, and Cherokee purple has clear skin. Below it is Cherokee chocolate, which has yellow skin, and it gives it that brick red color. And there's Cherokee green with the green flesh that is dead ripe, and it has yellow skin. These tomatoes all taste incredible. I could give them a full flavor, balanced flavor, acidity balanced with sweetness. But and this also goes to you choosing tomatoes that you want to grow in your garden. You very well may have started your seeds or have your plants growing. So these may be decisions for your next garden or your fall garden. But to colors equal flavors. Let's say you want a sweet tomato. Well, you could go with the pink Anna Russian or the ivory colored white queen, the beautiful orange juice colored Kellogg's breakfast, the beautiful round tennis ball perfection of Eva purple ball. The yellow with red, this particular one is ruby gold, but there are dozens and dozens of this type. I myself find that they taste like a peach as much, if not more than, as a tomato. And German Johnson. which is the only true North Carolina heirloom on the lower right. We then have the real intense tomatoes in the upper left. This is, when you go to the farmer's market and they say mild pinks or low acid yellows, all of that is a myth, as we'll get to toward the end of the talk. Lillian's Yellow, which is a Tennessee heirloom, is one of the most intensely flavored, delicious tomatoes I've ever grown. When Epic Tomato came out, I was invited to be on Lynn Rossetto Casper's Splendid Table. And the last question she asked me in the radio interview, if you had to go to Desert Island, what three tomatoes would you pick? And it was Sun Gold, Lillian's Yellow, and Cherokee Purple. And they've held the test of time. Those would probably still be my Desert Island. Although Captain Lucky would give one of them a run for their money, and I'm not sure which. You've got the green tomato, Dwarf Barrel Beauty, incredibly intense flavor. Nepal, which looks like an ordinary red tomato, like a Rutgers or a Better Boy, that is the tomato that converted me from growing hybrids back in 1981, 1982 to focusing on heirlooms exclusively by 1986. And I still grow Nepal all the time. I got it from Johnny Selected Seeds in the 1980s. It is superb. That is Rosella Purple, the lower center, which is a dead ringer for Cherokee Purple. And the one in the lower right is Cherokee Chocolate. Absolutely delicious. So these are the tomatoes I dream about during the winter because I know when I take a bite out of them, that flavor will linger for minutes. When I was selling seedlings in Raleigh, we had a lot of requests for that old-fashioned acidic tart tomato. And maybe because Americans tend to like sweet, it turns out it's easier to find sweet or well-balanced tomatoes than it is to find tart tomatoes. But we have Tiger Tom, we have Green Zebra, we have one of our dwarf varieties called Dwarf Mr. Snow in the lower left that is white. And we brought it to a tomato tasting one year. Out of the 250 tomatoes, it was one of the favorites and it was one of the most tart. Next to it is the Dwarf Blazing Beauty. Same color as Kellogg's Breakfast, but on the totally opposite end of the flavor spectrum. The one in the upper right is a Russian tomato called a Zoychka that I've been growing since 1990, and it's almost effervescent. It's so tingly when you bite into it. And the one in the lower right is just your typical big beefsteak that you would find at a farm stand when you were on a drive with your parents and grandparents when you were a child and they wanted to just stop and get tomatoes for your cookout. Just a great tart beefsteak flavor. And that particular one is Acres, West Virginia. So hopefully in this first half of the talk, you've gotten some indications and some guides about what you may want to grow. Sue, can you put that light? One of them, I look like I've just risen from the swamp here. I'm the swamp guy. I'm very pale, and I'm actually very tan from gardening. That one near you? Perfect. That worked great. I've come back to life. Thanks. Um, so hopefully through this first half of the talk, you've picked up some indications to help you decide what you want in your garden based on plant growth habit, based on whether you wish to save seeds or not. You need um, disease resistance or not. You have particular flavors and colors in mind. So now, how are we going to make this all happen? And we're going to get into, Sue, can you just fill me up? We're going to get into tomatoes from seeds to harvest. I'll cover a little bit about seed starting. I'm a rule breaker. This is how I start my tomatoes. I certainly don't advise everybody do this, but when I had 9,000 seedlings going in my driveway in Raleigh to bring to the farmer's market and only an office with small tables to put flats on, I just found out you can put 25 or 50 seeds in a cell. So I popularized and talked about the dense planting seeding technique, and I use it for tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, flowers, herbs, beets, pretty much you name it. So now we're going to talk about some guidelines at first and some general rules of thought about growing tomatoes well. Relationship of your size of fruit to the hours of sun, and also in some cases to what your typical humidity will be and temperatures. So that tomato on the left is Mortgage Lifter. It's 2.5 pounds. If you get less than 8 hours on your garden, maybe 6, it depends if it's really warm, you'll get a 20-foot tall plant with 3 or 4 tomatoes on it. So the larger tomatoes, they're very vigorous tall plants and they need lots of hours of direct sun. One interesting thing I've found that is that if you plant a Cherokee Purple, I planted in my backyard and I get about 7 hours of direct sun, it will get to 8 feet tall. Nearby, when I was working with a veterans healing farm, that Cherokee Purple, because it had sun from sunrise to sunset, never got taller than 4 feet tall. So the more sun you have, the shorter your plants will be because they don't have to reach. The less sun you have, the taller your plants will be because of that reach. Medium-sized tomatoes in the 6 to 12 ounce range are pretty happy, even with 6 to 8 hours of sun. They'll do well. They're not as fussy about high humidity and high heat. If you do have problems with fruit set, you can always grow cherry tomatoes because they're the least fussy of the bunch. You can put a container on your back porch, even if it only gets a few hours of sun a day, and you'll get a crop of cherry tomatoes. But success is really all about understanding your dates and your weather. And I know that I'm picking you up at a very different point in time that we are up here in Hendersonville. I typically start my seeds on March 1st, anticipating a plant out date of May 1st, because right about that time is our last frost date. And that's pretty much what I adhere to this year. But I know down there, I have friends who garden in Texas, and they talk about having an early crop. Then the middle of the summer is really difficult because of those 90-degree days and the humidity causes a lot of blossom drop. So then maybe you do succession planting. So you want your plants coming on again for a fall crop. But then the issue becomes the fact that the angle of the sun is different. The plants have less lumens and they take a particular variety will take longer to ripen and it won't develop quite the flavor because you're not getting as much intense sunlight. So just some things to think about. So the effect of hotter, more humid temperature, and this is an interesting bit of data. When I moved into Raleigh, North Carolina in 1992, we had 5 days of temperatures of 90 or above in the summertime. When I moved out of Raleigh in 2019, we had 75 days of 90 or above. And I can tell you that growing tomatoes successfully in Raleigh was more challenging the longer we were there because we were getting much more intense heat. Here in Hendersonville, we get about 5 days of 90 or above. Our issue is with disease because in the summer comes heavy rains. The heavy rains get the plants wet, and then you get bloom of different fungal diseases, and we'll talk about those. So, but the effect of hotter, more humid temperature is fruit set, differing disease patterns, increases in disease, new critters, vanishing of old critters, maybe real intensity of new critters, and changes that you have to make to how you care for your tomatoes. I like to tell people that, I'm a list maker and I jot a lot of things. So I'll start in a notebook and I'll write my initial gardening plan. And right from maybe a week or two after the seeds are planted, I start thinking of ripping out the pages and just adjusting to what I'm seeing with the weather. Um, so gardeners never engage their brains and their thinking from what they're doing. The most successful gardeners, there's no truly 100% successful gardener, just like I don't think there's any true garden expert. All there are gardeners that have gardened longer. And we all will, even a 40-year gardener, will still continue to screw a few things up now and then, and especially learn things each year. So we adjust continually throughout the season. And so I get more focused on the fun of the journey along the way, the act of the garden, and I get a little less hung up on whether I pick 25 pounds of fruit off each tomato plant. As a seed saver, often just getting a few tomatoes off each plant so I can taste it, photograph it, and save the seeds is a real victory. So how about this recipe for happy tomato plants? They love warm roots, and of course, that's not a big problem for you guys down there. For us, our soil warms pretty happily. Now, cool roots will not kill plants. And the roots will continue to develop in cool roots. You just won't see the development on the top until the temperatures really warm up. Planting it in cool soil or planting in cool temperatures does not stunt the plants. I always have my seedlings out as low as 35 degrees. And I play a little Russian roulette with them. Sometimes I'll take a double sheet of remake cloth and put it over because of the fear of microclimates. The weather may say 38, and in your yard it gets to 30. I've been burned only on a few plants a few times, but plants being exposed to chilly temperatures does not hurt them. Tomato plants need adequate water. And you've heard of the dry farming technique, I'm sure. That really would only work if you're in ground. So the roots can go and find the water that's probably deep down in the aquifers. You can't do dry farming in containers, probably very well in raised beds or straw bales, because once the water runs out, the plant will get stressed and you're just saying, please give me blossom end rot on all my tomatoes. Tomatoes love good drainage. Tomatoes love regular feeding, not overfeeding, not no feeding, but regular feeding. We'll talk a bit about that, but they really do need regular attention. So you can find the diseased foliage and get it off there before it spreads. You can find the critter that's chewing on your plant and remove it before it really does damage. So I'm not going to cover seed starting in for a long duration here, but I just want to touch upon what I think are a few key factors. 1 month between planting seed and transplanting and sizing up the pot. Don't forget I'm a thick planter, so I transplant into a pot, and every plant makes it. So if I have 50 seeds in a cell, that means I'm going to have 50 tomato plants to share or sell or whatever. Then 1 month to a seedling that's ready to plant out. Um, you can plant seeds thickly. You can do this with any crop. It's important to use a sterile mix. I tend to, and I know you're a organic gardening group, and full confession, I am always on the way to being more organic. I spray nothing, but I will use certain mixes that are probably not certified organic. So I will use a SunGrow propagation mix or Metro mix. It is sterile, and I've never had damping off issues with it. It's another thing about tomatoes is they will last, even stored at room temperature, for at least 10 years. So if you get a packet of tomato seeds and there's 20 seeds, just plant a few and the rest will be good for 10 years. If you refrigerate them, even longer. If you freeze them, even longer. I fill my flats and then I wet them. Then I sprinkle the seeds and then I just sprinkle dry mix on the top until I can't see the seed anymore. 1/32 of an inch, lightly mist, loosely cover with saran wrap to keep the moisture on those shallowly planted seeds and and knowing that water is going to build up because they're on constant temperature heat mats. I flip that saran wrap every day. So the plants, once they come up below, will always be seeing a dry side that's been exposed to air. Um, they germinate pretty quickly. And once your seedlings are up, turn off the heat mat and remove the plastic. And typically these were seeds were planted February 28th, and this is March 6th. And this type of quick and successful germination is really common in seeds up to 6, 7, or 8 years. When you get around 10 years or more, germination is a little bit spotty. And you can also have some seedlings that just aren't in quite as good condition. Then we get into option risks about what happens next. And hardening off is important, especially with young seedlings. And for years, because we were gardening a lot in Pennsylvania where it didn't warm up as quickly, um, fluorescent grow lights, they're inexpensive, they run cool. You can lower the tube so they're right at the top of the plants, and that would reduce legginess. And you would leave them under lights until they're ready to go outdoors. Of course, everybody's using LED now. What's tricky about those is the intensity can be variable brand to brand, so you have to be careful you don't burn your plants. What I've done now is to avoid grow lights altogether because we do get some mild days. And even when seedlings are extremely young like this, I'll make sure they're well watered. I'll make sure it's not windy. I'll put them in a place where I'm getting filtered sun through the trees and give them an hour or two. The next day, they'll get 3 or 4 hours. Within a week, they're living outside. They're getting their true leaves. The, the natural sun really prevents them from getting leggy. And even the seeds I planted at March 1st now, here we are on May 11th, and my tallest seedling is only 4 inches tall. So you get a big payoff. And any hardening off you do at the seedling stage, once you transplant that, you don't lose any of that. The plant banks it, and you don't have to start the clock and hardening off again. This is one of the mistakes that I made this year. My wife and I took a short vacation. My daughter from Seattle came to watch, to help with Eli. And because the weather's had 41, so I left all my seedlings out. And apparently we did hit 32 in certain select cells. This is frost damage. Now these plants are now perfectly healthy and planted in my garden. So if it's just a very light frost, 32, 33 degrees for a very brief amount of time, your plants will look unhappy, but they should come back. But if it were to hit 28, 29, 30, they would all be dead. One important thing about sizing them up is I put them in the same sterile mix, but I transplant into dry mix because if you were to water this, it would get stiff, the surface tension would be tight, and as you push the plants in, you could snap stems. Whereas if you're transplanting into dry mix, you can easily push them right up to the cotyledon. Any part of the stem that's under the planting mix will root and create even a stronger plant. I then water them really well and they sit on the floor of my garage. I close the garage during the day and I give them just kind of the natural ambient light through the windows for 2 or 3 days. Because when you transplant, you do necessarily damage some of the roots. The plants have to learn to take water up well again. The roots have to redevelop in some cases. Once they've had 3 or 4 days in the garage, and you get maybe a cloudy afternoon, you can move them back out, make sure they're well watered, and you can finish the hardening off process. So let's get into some key success factors if you gardening in the ground. And when I lived in Raleigh, I hand dug a garden and we gardened until the trees around the garden got too tall and my sunlight became inadequate. So what can in-ground gardens have that's detrimental? They can have a heavy clay rock substructure that prevents water from freely draining. And tomatoes hate wet feet. So you would need to get organic matter in there and dig through the hard pan and loosen it up so you get good drainage. That way, when your tomatoes start to grow, they'll look vibrant and happy rather than looking like they're dry when they're actually drowning because that water is not draining out. In-ground gardens can have disease issues. Tomatoes do develop a host of diseases. There's bacterial, there's viral, there's fungal, and if you grow in the same area in the garden year after year, you will build up diseases in the soil. So you need to consider rotation. If you have a spot that you love to grow your tomatoes, but it has become diseased, there's always putting a piece of landscape fabric over that area and planting in containers or straw bales. On top of that, just preventing the roots from getting into the diseased ground and do that for 3 to 5 years because for some diseases, it takes a long time for the disease to work itself out of the soil. Getting trans tomatoes into the ground, again, planting them deep. There's a nice, happy transplant. I like to use short transplants because there's less adjustment of the tomato or any plant for that matter when it goes into the ground. Dig a nice deep hole, plant them deep, get as much of that stem covered as you can, and then mulch because one of the first ways of introducing diseases into tomato plants is when you have different fungal spores in your soil and it rains and they splash up on your lower leaves, and then you get the brown spots and the yellow spots indicative of septoria leaf spot or early blight. So just right away putting maybe a 3-inch layer of fresh untreated grass clippings is perfect. Of course, you can use lots of things for mulch. The important aspects is that they breathe and that they let water through. As far as watering and feeding in the traditional garden, um, less than when you're in containers or straw bales because the plants can go down and find water. And when you get a good rain, that water sticks around in the soil for a while. So really, the frequency is up to the weather. What's really important, though, is not watering from above and getting the foliage wet. So if you use sprinklers, a lot of the water evaporates before it reaches the plant. It will get your leaves wet. Wet leaves act as a disease magnet. And where the water really needs to go is at the root zone. So I always have a hose with no nozzle and just water right at the base of the plant. As far as feeding, use your favorite food, a balanced fertilizer. I'm sure organic gardeners will be really happy with the Espoma products like Tomato Tone and Plant Tone at the package directions. Maybe every 2 to 3 weeks to give a boost. And if you're watering a lot or it's hot or it's raining a lot, increase that a little bit. You remember at the beginning, I talked about one of the challenges of indeterminate plants is you have to keep them upright. Best not to let them sprawl because the leaves will be, unless you really mulch well, because critters are down there on the ground level and diseases are in the soil. So I just use big balls of inexpensive twine that I get from the big box store. And I just have my make ties to the tomato, to the twine, as much closeness up the plant as needs to keep the plant under control. And here is an 1894 heirloom that I dug out of the USDA collection called Ferris Wheel. It's an incredible tomato. Growing in my 2018 garden. The plant is about 6 feet tall. I've got it on 8-foot stakes. You can see that on the left. They're the metal core plastic coated, and I'm using twine everywhere to keep everything together. I am double staking this plant. So if you have large fruited heirloom types that get really tall and yield heavily, it's a good idea to double stake them or Florida weave, just because one single stake in a thunderstorm, it's no match for it. It'll probably be snapped and go over. Let's say you want to grow, and this is an old picture. I've got a lot of hair. My wife looks just the same. Um, she's gone to bed, but she would like that. So let's say you want to grow in a deck and you've got your railing of your deck. You can just lash wooden poles to it and you can grow your plant right up those poles. And that little inset picture on the left is, I think that was a little lucky at about 3 feet tall, just getting to the top of the railing. And then the bigger picture you see on the right, that's about 6 feet tall now, and the fruit are forming and ripening, and I'm tying it right up. This is what it looks like if you grow one plant in a straw bale, caged and unpruned. Um, this plant is a Captain Lucky, and I must have harvested 30 or 40 pounds of fruit off this plant. And I just tucked any of the foliage back into the cage. This, appropriately enough, is a Texas tomato cage. It's double stacked, so it's about 6 feet tall, and it's secured into the ground with 8-foot metal stakes, and it went fantastically. Let's say, well, I was a driveway gardener for a while because the trees chased me out of my garden and into the driveway in Raleigh. So how do you support plants when you can't drive a stake into the ground? Because anybody who's grown a tomato plant in a container or grow bag and just used one stake knows that when the fruit form and it gets heavy, it will just tip over in the wind. So what I figured out works very well is to get a ballast pot. No holes in the bottom. You just fill it with the heaviest, clayest, awful dirt you can find and drive 2 stakes into it. And so each plant gets a stake in the ballast pot and a stake in its own pot with the plant. And just by dividing the weight, you can keep a very busy driveway garden upright well into the season. and that worked really well. Nothing's more frustrating when a thunderstorm comes through and all of your plants have toppled and it's just such a pain to put it all back together again. So now we're going to touch just very briefly on containers and straw bales. So this is a picture of my harvest here in Hendersonville in 2023, where every tomato on this table was grown in a container or a straw bale, many 1 and 1.5 pound beefsteaks. This picture actually causes me stress because it's wonderful to have this many tomatoes, but that means you have to do something with those tomatoes. So we became very avid canners and sauce makers and freezers and roasters. You can use anything for container. It just has to have drainage. Um, I like using the black plastic grow bags. I get them from Peaceful Valley in Albany, Oregon. It's groworganic.com is the name of their website. They're less than $1 when you buy them in a box of 40. I'm using some grow bags this year that are now 15 years old. But whatever works for you is great. Size wise, 5 gallon is really good for determinate tomatoes, dwarf tomatoes. If you want to get really good yields out of indeterminates, you want to go with 7 to 10 gallon. And the self-watering containers, of course, work well where you've got a well at the bottom that holds excess water. Your planting mix is in a kind of a porous bag in the top where you have a wick that goes from that bag into the water. As the plant needs water, it just draws it up. You add water through the holes in the side. So if you're going to have a hot stretch, but you're going to be out of town for a while, you can fill up that well and your plant will just drink while you're gone. Earth boxes are of course, a form of self-watering. The success factor for container gardening is what you put in the container. So I use an approximate 3-to-1 ratio of a soilless mix to a compost, such as a composted manure, a black cow, your own compost. The soilless mix gives it drainage and fluffiness and ability to dry out nicely. And the compost gives it some absorption capacity so it holds water reasonably well. Can you reuse potting mix? Because container gardeners will tell you that this is where you spend the most money. The answer is absolutely. As long as your plant does well, and the worst that it gets is some fungus foliage diseases, you certainly can use it again. Just either dump it in a pile the next year, fill your bags and refresh it with some fresh material and mix in some plant food, or just leave your containers out, let them go through the winter. And then, of course, by then, you have a full pot at the beginning of the season, and after all the watering, it probably gets down to a half anyway. You can just cultivate it up and top it with fresh mix, and you're good to go. This used to drive my Raleigh Homeowners Association members crazy because we put our garden where we weren't supposed to put it, in the driveway and full visible view by those walking by. But it was a great educational garden, and we found if we just gave away produce or plants, we killed them with kindness, and they let us keep our garden here. And we would harvest a ton of produce out of our containers. So straw bale gardening, just briefly, it's taking a straw bale and turning it into a compost bin that's the equivalent of two 20-gallon containers. It's a wonderful method of gardening. It was actually used in the 1950s by pickle companies. They grew their cucumbers in them. And it first appeared in literature in the 1970s in an article written by a professor in Florida. When Joel Carston's book came out in 2013, it really popularized the project, the methodology, and now it's considered one of the standard alternatives in the gardener's tool belt. Really, all you need to do is place your bales, alternating days of nitrogen. This is just a 2805 lawn starter, but if you are strictly organic, you could go with a fish emulsion or blood meal, and you water it every day for a week. And then you go with half dose of your nitrogen for 3 days, and then a balanced food such as your a 10-10-10 or your Espoma plant tone. No matter what, if you start treating your bales today, you'll be able to plant them in 2 weeks. and either orientation, strings up or strings on the side, works fine. So you can orient them to best fit your gardening need. Um, this is how well it works. So look at the size of the plants that I plant in these. This picture, these next two pictures were from last year. But this is a great technique to do with kids because the mushrooms just start flying out of these. These are ink cap mushrooms, totally harmless. They go away after a few weeks. They actually all disappear by the end of the day and then come back the next morning. So this is May 8th. These are the same plants 2 weeks later. So what's happening in these straw bales are the centers are really warm, about 120, 130 degrees, because they are turning into a compost bin. That warmth affects the roots of the plants and helps to push them along. I direct seed beans or summer squash or cucumbers into straw bales, and I harvest squash and beans 35 days from seeding. So it is really an amazing technique. This is a look down my tomato columns in mid-season here in Hendersonville. And let's talk about suckering strategy. I know we're actually doing pretty well with time. We'll get there, and you have me as long as you want me. So suckers on indeterminate plants form anywhere the main stem and the leaf, which comes off at more of a 90-degree angle, meet. This discussion is not for determinate tomatoes or dwarfs because suckering those will really harm the yield, but suckering indeterminates keeps them in horizontal and vertical control. And it's okay to top plants. Let's say you've got an 8-foot stake and your plant gets to the top of the 8-foot stake. You can just chop it off right there. You can prune suckers that are 2 feet long. So tomato plants are not fussy of being controlled, tamed, pruned. Um, so what I do, I use a different technique every year just because I'm trying to learn about the productivity of suckers and how they improve your yield. Because really every junction suckers, and on every junction you're going to get another stem that will fruit and also sucker. So last year I let 3 suckers develop in addition to the main stem and removed all others. This year, because, and I don't know if any of you have noticed this with heirlooms, but they get about 3 feet tall, and instead of the main stem continuing as it is, it splits into 2, 3, or 4. So this year, I'm going to remove all suckers below that split, and then I'm just going to let those 2, 3, or 4 main stems continue up the plant and remove all other suckers. But you can try different things on different plants just to see what works best for you. If you cage, you don't have to sucker at all, and your yield will be enormous, but you better water and feed that plant like crazy. And another nice thing about suckers is you can make clones of your plants for succession planting or for sharing with friends and neighbors. So just letting a sucker get to 6 or 8 inches long, sticking it in a glass of water for a week, or in some damp planting mix in your garage in the shade, and it will root and start growing again, and you have an exact clone of the mother plant. So this is a picture that I should label beware. This is what happens if you don't sucker and top your plants. And you can probably see on the left in the front, there's a chair holding a plant up. Behind it, there's a ladder. Other places in here, there's tables. This was a very productive garden, but it was a mess because I got a little bit lazy and I felt bad about removing so much of the plant and I just let it go. And it just collapsed all over itself. The problem with plants getting like this is disease can spread more easily and critters can get in and find the fruit. So the next year, when I did my video course with Joe Lample, I decided to follow what I suggested in the book, which is to sucker well, tie well, top well, and look at how much better that looks. And the yield was just as wonderful. So let's look at some common diseases that afflict almost all tomato growers everywhere. Early blight, also called alternaria. And how you can identify this is that concentric circles in the gray area, the target appearance. Sometimes there'll be a little more yellow on it. Um, now, Early blight resistance, early blight tolerance, it really doesn't matter because there's so much of it blowing around everywhere in our yards and our gardens. What's best to do is just when you see leaves that start to have this blemish, remove them, because on the flip side of this leaf are the spores, the alternaria spores, that will just float around and infect other leaves on the plant or other plants. If you've ever had to deal with late blight, which is a real serious disease, they look quite different. Whereas early blight has that zone target appearance, and late blight has the brown blemish with a lighter green zone around it. So if your plants get early blight, your plant will do fine as long as you keep the blemish leaves off the plant. Late blight will kill the plant, and it will probably kill all the other plants in your garden. So if you get signs of late blight on one plant, get it out of there quick. Septoria, it's not related to early blight, but it behaves the same way, where it's fungal spores that adhere to wet foliage. They form little brown speckles all over your leaves. Again, the spores are on the flip side. A lot of times those speckles will be surrounded by yellow. It spreads fast. So this is one leaf hand with Septoria, and if I would have left this on the plant, the whole side of my plant would have had it by the next morning if it was a humid night. So again, get this off the plant quick. The plant will just keep going on making new leaves. It will not miss some leaves being removed. A more serious disease that's actually in the soil and the vector is going through the roots is Fusarium wilt. And it can stay in soil for many years. It shows itself where a well-watered, formerly healthy plant one day looks like it's just wilting. You water it, it may perk up a little bit, but the next day it wilts, and then it starts turning yellow. That means the Fusarium wilt fungus has gotten through the roots, gotten into the main stem of the plant, and clogged up the water transportation route into the top of the plant. You may as well take that plant out of the garden if that happens and realize that that spot has Fusarium wilt in it. Now, they do sell Fusarium resistant and tolerant varieties. You look for the F. Verticillium is similar. You look for the V. And again, nematodes, which are little microscopic worms in soil, you look for the N. But there's no such thing as absolute resistance or tolerance. Tolerance means the plant can take up the agent and it will tolerate it for a while. Resistance means the plant will block the uptake of that agent into the plant. But in very high concentrations of any of these diseases, even a hybrid with an alphabet soup after the variety name will go down to disease. This is the same little fellow that shows up in the tips of corn, eating the kernels. It's the corn worm, the tomato fruit worm. It works fast. It starts off eating holes in the leaves of your tomatoes. You can if you find a tomato with the leaves being eaten a little bit, flip it over and you'll see the worm and you can crush it at that point because they'll leave the leaves alone and head for the fruit. And if you see round holes in your tomatoes, there's a fruit worm in there. Uh, Two good organic compounds to control these are BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, and spinosad sprays. They are organic and they paralyze the digestive system of the worm. The tomato hornworm, of course, I don't know how much of a problem you have with it, but it's big and scary and hard to find because they're so well camouflaged. If they have the white ricey grains on them, leave them on the plant because that's the pupa of a wasp, a parasitic wasp that will hatch and eat that worm out from the inside. And the little babies will go and parasitize all the other hornworms it can find. If you can't find it, go out at night with a UV flashlight. The foliage will be purple and the worms will light up bright green, and your neighbors may think that you're totally off your rocker. Um, we don't have that much of a problem here, but I did talk to a Texas group some years ago, and they mentioned that leaf-footed bugs are a problem for you guys, and they're stubborn. Good garden hygiene, removing them when you see them, realizing what the little eggs look like, and getting them off the plant. Neem oil, natural predators. We have stink bugs up here that are relatives that are a real pain. Some years we have a lot. Some years we don't have that many. but they use their proboscis to just poke little holes in the tomato, which ruins the appearance and the flavor once they ripen. Two physiological, not disease issues. These are about weather and conditions and how you're growing them. Blossom end rot happens when a plant gets stressed, and it could be due to high temperature or lack of water or nutrition that interrupts the calcium uptake into the fruit. That causes the beginnings of the dark spot, which gets bigger with time and causes, like in this case, premature ripening of the fruit. The best way to control blossom end rot is drip irrigation, really good nutrition for your plant, and just not letting it get stressed out. The most critical time is when the plant's growing, it's flowering, and it's producing little green fruit. It's doing an awful lot at once, so it will feel stress a lot more at that point. As far as cracking, it's mostly for those people who want to leave the tomatoes on the plant until they're ripe. Uh, any little bit of extra water will cause the fruit to swell, which will crack the skin. So the best thing to do is pick your tomatoes at half ripe, so-called breaker stage. They're colored on the bottom, green on the top. Bring them in, leave them on your kitchen counter out of the sun 2 or 3 days. They'll ripen up completely and the flavor will be indistinguishable and you will not get the cracking issue. This is what happens when I don't pay attention to that as well and all the radial cracking on my fruit from a few years ago. So the last topic I want to discuss is a myth bust on tomato acidity. And an urban legend is that pink tomatoes are lower acid, yellow tomatoes are lower acid, white tomatoes, etc. The reality of the situation is the USDA tested hundreds of tomato varieties in the 1960s. The pH of just about every variety they tested has a minuscule difference. The acidity is all the same. So what's causing those flavor differences? Tart tomatoes have genetic coding for low levels of sugar. Sweet tomatoes have genetic coding for high levels of sugar, which completely masks the acidity. Now, the good news is you don't have to worry what tomato you're growing to can it because there are no low acid tomatoes. We do the blue ball book. We use lemon juice. We use a little bit of salt. We use the water bath boiling method. And we've had some of our quarts of tomatoes for up to 2 or 3 years with no loss of quality. And they're just wonderful to have. This is the year we canned 63 quarts and they went fast. Why am I here Zooming with you guys tonight? So my origin of my interest in gardening is the people that are labeled in red. This is a piece of my genealogy family tree. My grandfather, my father, my grandmother, they instilled the love of gardening. That's my grandfather, Walter, on the left. That's my dad, Wilfred, on the right. And they would take me into their gardens and to the park. So your job, and I'm sure you do this well, is to grow gardeners. Bring people into that wonderful organic garden that you described. Involve people. Gardening builds community. I truly think gardeners are going to have to save the world. So we're doing good stuff here. Um, I do have my book still. I'm working on the dwarf tomato book will be my third, which will be my third, and it will tell the story of how we developed all of those dwarfs. If anybody is interested in a signed copy, they can email me. Otherwise, they're on Amazon, etc. And an information slide. My blog is craiglehoulier.com. As the season gets going, I blog more frequently. I talk about what I'm growing and have a lot of pictures. nctomatoman@gmail.com is my email. I'm doing my weekly Instagram lives on Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern, where I sit out in the garden, do a show and tell, and then maybe cover one topic in depth and leave at least 20 minutes for your questions. And the Joe Lample course from his Organic Gardening Academy is growing epic tomatoes. I'll leave you with this. These are my current favorite eating tomatoes. Out of my 4,000 grown, these are the ones that I love the most right now. For all of you there who have watched this and see it after the fact, if it's going to be recorded and posted, which is absolutely fine. I really appreciate the invitation. Hope that everybody found a little something that they can tuck into their back pocket and use while they're growing epic tomatoes. But Thank you very much. And now I'll be happy to stick around and answer whatever questions you may have. I know you're still there. I see the participants. Oh, you're muted. The podium is still showing muted. You got a little cross through your microphone. Is this SOS, David? Help! Ah, you got it.
Okay, it's this one. Okay. You want to turn that one on?
Did you turn it?
I didn't.
You did?
I didn't.
You did. Yes.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, hello, hello.
There it is. Yeah. Can you hear me now? No.
I can
Yes?
hear, the speaker, Craig, I can hear you.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? I'm loud. Go ahead. Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah.
We plan on talking garden.
Okay. Welcome. So she's asking if you have any recommendations for dwarf tomatoes for Central Texas.
You know, the fact that they're being grown in Central Texas en masse. One, it may be worth shooting victory seeds or question to see how they're doing with them. But my view is with your climate, just avoid the biggest ones. So you could do something like a Fred's tie-dye, Firebird Sweet, any of the cherries like Eagle Smiley or Irma's Highland, Dwarf Sweet Sue would do well for you. The only ones you may find that are a little trickier would be things like Rosella Purple, which is a larger tomato, Kodiak King, and I'm just trying to go off the top of my head here. I don't think I could name all 175, so I'm just picking out. I would avoid Lucky Swirl. That's a 1 pound tomato. But Saucy Mary would be great. Golden Tipsy, Mr. Snow would be worth a try. Uh, anything in the cherry tomato up to about an 8 ounce average would do very well for you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? I just thought that was an awesome, very informative lecture, Craig. And
You
I
know,
really appreciate
what I
it.
like to do, I like to take my book and kind of make it come to life for people because I wrote most of that in 2012, 2013. So being able to give talks like this allow me to update it, provide new things I've learned. So, I mean, it's really gratifying when groups ask me to speak because to me, that's why I do what I do. Learn stuff when I'm out there, screw up, and then share it with gardeners so you guys can pass it on. And nobody should ever change anything that's working for them. I give all this different advice and stuff. If it sounds good to you to try it, but I will never be one to say, you must do this. I say, I do this. What do you think? So, I think it's less intimidating for people to just realize we're all playing at this and trying to find the best way forward.
And I gotta say, I'm not really much of a tomato person, a tomato eater. And
Uh-huh.
I've been at the store going, okay,
Yeah.
determinate hybrid,
Yeah.
what the hell is the difference? And I loved how you explained those different and
Mm.
well laid out way so that we could all go, oh, okay, that's what the difference is.
Well,
I appreciate that.
a lot of these terms are thrown around by seed catalogs, and they really confuse people, and even books. I, I want to just chat with people in my garden. So if this worked out where you felt like we were walking around my garden together and it wasn't intimidating and we had some fun, mission accomplished on my part. And you've got a friend now you can email anytime with questions you have. I always get back to people really fast. So
So yeah, she said there's questions in the chat. Yeah.
So someone's asking if, uh, did he, the question is, he mentioned that tomato production is not affected by episodes of cold weather and or wilting.
Did you hear that, Craig? You want me to repeat it?
that tomato production is not terribly affected by periods of cold weather. Is that, was there any other part to that?
And wilt.
And wilting.
Um, wilting wilting will typically come apart by either a disease or insufficient water. So wilt is always a sign of something wrong. Um, cold really, or temperatures down to 35 or 40 degrees would not cause wilt or harm. The reason people get nervous about it is because they may have a different microclimate in their area. So you really can't trust the weathermen with low temperatures, but it does not harm plants. So, my seedlings this year were 3-inch tall plants at 35 degrees, 38 degrees overnight, and those plants will become 8 to 10 foot tall plants, giving me 30 to 40 pounds of fruit. So, it's that's one of those things I don't really worry about. What tomato plants really don't like is wind-driven rain. And certain varieties, paste varieties, heart-shaped varieties, will look half dead if, as seedlings, they get wind-driven rained on, like a big thunderstorm. But I won't say tomatoes are weeds, but they're pretty trouble-free until they get mature and fruit set. And that's when the problems of temperature effect on fruit set and different diseases come in. A lot of the fungal diseases are actually triggered by really high heat and humidity. So your plant will look great until it gets hot and humid, and then you start seeing things you didn't expect. So, yeah, I'm looking, but production will not be affected by little periods of cold weather. I'm looking at the chat actually, and yeah, so if I look at recommended varieties for Central Texas, certainly give Cherokee Purple a try, Green Giant, Earl, um, Polish Cherokee Green, Cherokee Chocolate, Sun Gold, Nepal. The only problematic one might be Brandywine as a fussy variety, and one year it will be great, and the other year it's not that so great. Potato Leaf Yellow is a wonderful tomato that looks like it's going to be very widely adapted. Giant Syria might be tough because it grows to 2.5 pounds and it can be really fussy, but just about all the tomatoes on that list should do really well. And everything on this list, these are out of 4,000. These are my favorite. And I think I've got all the questions in the chat. Is there any other place I need to
Question,
look?
just mention fruit set and temperature. When it's
Yeah,
too hot.
yeah. Let's do the fruit set and temperature. So cherry tomatoes are the least fussy in terms of fruit set and temperature. So cherry tomatoes don't mind heat. They don't mind cooler temperatures. You'll get a good yield no matter what, and they rarely drop blossoms. As the size of the fruit potential of the variety increases, it starts to get a little bit more fussy. But even and some of this is the flower structure. So if you look at Nepal, which is about a 6-ounce variety, it has smaller flowers like some of the newer hybrids like Celebrity. But if you look at a mortgage lifter flower, um, some of the flowers on the plants are like marigolds. And I think what happens is in hot, humid conditions, the pollen clumps. Tomato pollination to create a fruit should occur as the flower opens. The flower opens and the anthers brush against the pistil, the pollen is transferred, the deed happens. When it's 90 or above, it can help to go and gently flick your blossoms. Don't like really wail on them, so you're going to knock them off, but just give a gentle flick that can help the pollen move. But if you have a period where it's going to be 92 to 100 for a week and a half, it's likely that a lot of the blossoms on the larger fruited varieties will drop off because the pollen at really high temperature can even become sterile. One way to help with that is to create a little bit of a microclimate by putting some screening, you know, over the plant that will reduce the sun exposure by 20 or 30%, but don't put it so close to the plant that you're creating even a hotter microclimate inside. If you remember the movie The Godfather, the scene where Marlon Brando finally dies, you looked at the tomato plants in the background and there were there was white fabric blowing in front of the plants. And I'm pretty sure that was to cool the plants down so that they would get more tomatoes on them. So there's your crazy tip of the day. So a lot of my friends in Texas do try to get plants out early so that they'll get a good yield and good fruit set before the real heat sets in. And then they'll try to figure out a date to get a second planting in later in the summer where it still may be hot, but the temperature should cool off by the time the tomatoes start flowering and fruiting. I'm not sure specifically with the area in Austin whether you get like that core of summer that becomes very, very difficult because you get consistent high heat. But like I said, my daughter grew all of these varieties in Abilene in containers and just had really, really good luck with them. So she's a chip off the old block, my daughter. So I hope that helps. And if any questions do come to mind after the fact, all you need to do is email me, nctomatoman@gmail.com, and I'll get you the answer. And you can even share it back with your group if there's a lot of interest.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Margaret mentions tastiness wasn't color related. No, so here's how I'll put it with color and flavor. We eat with our eyes, and if we're looking at a white tomato, our mind is probably going to say, I bet you this is bland. But in truth, tomato varieties, no matter what color, are a lot like all of us. They each have unique packages of genes that are specific for color, flavor, tartness, sweetness. And so that's why when I showed those slides, I picked up different color characteristics for each flavor characteristic. I will say one thing. The green flesh tomatoes, as a rule, I'm not sure I've tasted one that I haven't really, really liked, except maybe green zebra. That's not a favorite, but green giant, Cherokee green, evergreen, Moldovan green, they just all have really, really excellent flavors. That was one of the more fun things I discovered when I started doing heirlooms was, you know, green tomatoes that stay green when they're ripe and they taste like red tomatoes. It's pretty amazing. So I hope that helps, Margaret. I did a blind tasting with Joe Lample where we put 20 tomatoes. I drove up down to his place in Georgia and his assistant cut them up. We knew what we had, but we were blindfolded. So they completely randomized them. Talk about pressure, because some of my favorites was in there, and I was thinking, what if I tasted a Cherokee Purple and gave it a 4 out of 10? But what was interesting is Captain Lucky, Cherokee Purple, Cherokee Chocolate, Lillian's Yellow. Joe and I both gave them 9 out of 10s. So that was fun. How do you tell if a green tomato is ripe? If it's a clear skin green, like Green Giant or Aunt Ruby's green, you look for the bottom blossom end has a little bit of a pink blush, and it gives a little bit when you squeeze it. If it's evergreen or Cherokee green, the skin actually turns gold when the tomato ripens. So it will have a yellow gold exterior, but a green interior. So the yellow fleshed greens have a ripeness indicator built in. So anyway, as you can see, we can have a nice chat on all of this stuff forever. But You let me know uh, when you're ready for me to stop, and then I'll go get myself a nice drink of water. We good?
You good for? Yeah, we're good, Craig. We're good here, and I don't see any other questions online. So thanks so much.
This was real fun. I hope people loved it. If you guys have any feedback, please send it my way. Otherwise, spread the word, grow tomatoes, and ask for any help. I'm here to help. See you guys.
We'll do it. All
Good
right.
night.
Take care. Bye.
On this table here and free to, you're bagging up. Okay, start for sale here.